really got what I think is a terrific turnout. And I'd like to share with you a little bit of how this got going. Uh, Terri and I and some others serve on the Adult Education Committee of Temple Emmanuel. And at the end of our last meeting, back in the late winter, I shared the fact that I had been given this book. And I had read it and thoroughly enjoyed it and mentioned it. And we got this burst of people saying, oh, you know, my grandmother and my mother, and they taught us words and they didn't want us to know. And the stories were shared and said, you know, maybe we can make something out of this. So as you've seen, we now have a 3-part series, this being the first with Ilan Stavans, and he's going to talk about the book in Yiddish and the history of migration and other things. And then next week, we'll have somebody from the Yiddish Book Center. It's completed its 40th year, and they're entering what they call their decade of discovery, where each year for the next 10 will be a focus on a different area of learning. And they have an amazing thing going on out there. I hadn't realized how comprehensive it was and what they've accomplished. And so if you haven't had time, go to the Yiddish Book Center website. I think you'll enjoy it quite a bit. And then as the second part of that, we're going to have Cantor Ken Richmond and Rav Shira Shazir. They'll be talking about how they use Yiddish in their household. And I think at that time, it will be ideal if people want to share ideas and stories and talk about how it was for them. And so that should be pretty lively. And then the third session, that, by the way, that's 2 weeks out. And then 4 weeks from tonight is our cantor, Elias Rosenberg, and he'll be talking about Yiddish music. And so, you know, this is a really a large body of knowledge, and there's quite a bit. You can look at theater, you can look at food, you can look at population migration and history and the evolution of the language. And there's just quite a bit to it. And I've learned a lot myself. And so the idea here is that people can think about what's important to them and maybe take their knowledge a little bit more deeply. So what we're going to do tonight to start, which is kind of a really big bonus and surprise, Ilan and Elias know each other and have history together. And we were just sharing that before we got on. So we're going to have them talk a little bit about you know, some of their Yiddish understanding or background, I should say, from their roots. They're both from Latin America, or rather Mexico and Latin America, I should say, Argentina. And then we'll move into the heart of the discussion, and we'll have questions. What we'd like you to do is not to raise your hand, but write into the chat. And after we finish, leaving about maybe at 8:45 roughly, or depending how long the conversation goes, we'll have a chance to take questions, and Terri will moderate those questions, and Samantha, she will give people access to speak and mute us when appropriate and so forth. So I want to turn it over to Ilan and Elias and just ask them to you know, share a little bit of you know, the history together, and just you know, we learned just now about Elias and his first tape that he bought in Yiddish and how that was. And anyway, so you guys, I don't think you need much more prompting from me. So go ahead.
Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Stan. And good evening, everybody. What an honor and privilege to be here with all of you and to welcome Ilan for all of us tonight. Ilan is a fabulous author, writer. He has done many books, and many of those books are actually something that I can relate very much to, because he speaks in many of those books about the condition of being Latino and Jewish at the same time. I have one of his books that I love here, Golemito. I love it. It's the Spanish twist to the Golem, and fantastic book that I read with my kids many times. So I had the privilege of doing a few programs with Ilan over the years. The New Center for Arts and Culture in Boston years ago, we did a couple of collaborations with Ilan, a program called Jewish con Salsa, Jewish with Salsa, and it was a lot of fun. Two of them were at a restaurant in Cambridge, I believe, called Ole Restaurant, and what was, maybe perhaps some of you attended that event, It was fascinating. Ilan will bring all his stories about Latin American Jews. I will intersperse that with music from tangos from Argentina and music from Brazil and other countries, and all of that will be together with fabulous food that Ilan recommended. Some of the plates. We did the same program in Newbridge. And one thing that it's fascinating and also shows the character and the talent of this man is that in 2014 we invited Ilan to Temple Emmanuel for Shavuot, a night of Shavuot, and I remember vividly the chapel was packed. We had 150 people there and something like 120 chairs, something like that. And Ilan came to talk specifically about the Jews of Latin America, but in those days, everybody wanted to hear about the new pope, the Argentinian new pope, that he had some wonderful relationship with the Jewish leaders in the community. And I remember vividly, Ilan writes me that afternoon, say, Elias, I don't think I'm going to make it. I have fever and I'm very sick. I cannot do it. And I said, Ilan, please, there are so many people waiting for you. It's really waiting for your talk, looking forward. You cannot do this. He came, he was boiling, and he gave this fantastic talk about the Jews of Latin America, and then he flew because he actually had the flu. He had the fever, and it was a memorable event. And so I want to welcome Ilan here with all of us.
Elias, it's an enormous pleasure. Es un gran placer seeing you again and seeing the wonderful congregation that you have. I am happy that experience that happened was about a flu and not about a virus, so that I didn't need to be quarantined. Amazing how the world has changed since we last saw each other. And here's to hoping that the world will change again in about 2 weeks for the better.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, again, it's a real pleasure. And I don't know, Stanley, if you want to take over, but I have only one question to Ilan, is that, I just for the sake of it, I just Googled you today. I Googled you many times, but today specifically, I Googled you in Amazon. And I don't know, you have something like 50 books there or something like that. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And the topics are so diverse, so diverse. You have Golemito, and you have this book in Yiddish, and also you have something about the Inquisition. And perhaps that is something that you could share with all of us. Where do you get the inspiration to write so many things and so diverse in terms of topics?
Elias, again, I want to thank you very much. I appreciate the relationship that we have forged over the years. My impression is that our lives are very short. We have a clock in our forehead, each of us, that is ticking. And I have learned as an immigrant that I need to give back to this country for its generosity. And I also have learned that there's nothing more scary to my kind of mind than specialization as a form of ghettoizing knowledge. I love to be a specialist, but not of only one topic, of a variety of topics. And so my mind wanders as it wanders from one succulent topic like the crypto-Jews in Latin America and the autos de fe, to the plight of Hebrew and the revival in Israel, to the identities of Jews during the Holocaust. Mostly it is about identity, it is about language, and it is about being Jewish in the many diasporas. To me, the issue of immigration might be the one that unites them all. We Jews are the bona fide immigrants, have always been, almost from the moment that we were expelled from Jerusalem and the destruction of the first and second temple, and we know what it means to be an outsider, and it is that both privilege and plight, being an outsider, that prompts me to push forward and to engage with the environment.
Thank you, Ilan. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to have you here. Stanley?
Thank you.
Let me unmute. Thank you. That was great. I appreciate it, and I'm sure everybody else did as well. Thanks. Ilan, I'm curious to know, and I think many others must be, how this book came to be top of mind and what process you used to decide what would be included, because there's much to be known, and yet you've made it a very contemporary, easy to read book, which kept my interest right from start to finish. So thank you for the book.
My pleasure. The book, Stan, came about in a rather serendipitous fashion. I have had the privilege of living not 2 miles away from the Yiddish Book Center. And to me, that Yiddish Book Center, I live and teach at Amherst College. So the Yiddish Book Center is on the campus of Hampshire. And though I can say that I have always been very proud to be a member of the Amherst College community, I think I accepted the job in this area because the Yiddish Book Center was very close. And it was enabling me to be in New England, in touch with the extraordinary intellectual tradition that this region has given to the world, from Melville and Emerson and Emily Dickinson to Edgar Allan Poe and others, and have just the Yiddish, Yiddish reservoir of literature not too far away. I have been on the board of the Yiddish Book Center. I have done many activities there. I have helped them organize some events. And about 2 years ago, Aaron Lansky, the founder and president of the Yiddish Book Center, approached me with the idea that there would be a forthcoming 40th anniversary of the center, and if I would be willing to help them put together a series of events. And I was very happy and honored with this invitation, and I told them that I thought it would be the ripe occasion to put together an anthology of Yiddish using to a considerable extent the terrific publication that they have that comes out twice a year or 4 times a year, depending on the regularity over the 40 years, called Pachenträger. That has published translations, articles, interviews, letters. I have been an assiduous reader of that magazine. It has kept the Yiddish that I grew up with in Mexico very much alive and tangible to me. And I suggested to them that maybe we could use that the treasure trove of Pachenträger as a starting point, as a platform to celebrate the 40th anniversary with an anthology. And here is the serendipitous side. Sometimes a book, Stan, comes to me first with a theme or a character or a line or a scene. And I know if I'm going to write it in English or in Yiddish or in Spanish or in Hebrew, and I know if it's going to be a novel or it's going to be a short story or it's going to be an essay. This one, the title of it came before. How Yiddish changed America and how America changed Yiddish. I posed it to myself as if it was a test. How could I answer this question? How did Yiddish change America and how did America change Yiddish? What kind of cross-fertilizing relationship existed? As a Mexican Jew, I had the opportunity to tackle it both as an insider. I have now lived longer in the United States than in Mexico, where I grew up and was raised. But I could also bring the perspective of Argentina and Mexico and Canada, because America is not only the United States, but America is the very large expansion of land that goes from the Pampas in Chile and Argentina and Brazil to Alaska and Canada. And so it was by trying to answer this question and by looking at the very best short stories and poems and essays and letters that the book came together. Let me end by telling you that I think we Jews are the people of the book. in the sense that we are the people of the anthology. The Bible is an anthology. There is a collection of different disparate stories. The Talmud is an anthology, Pirkei Avot. And I wanted to produce an anthology that would represent the diversity of forms, of themes, of ideologies that we American Jews, America understood again, written large, represent. And so there are pieces by Moshe Zinger and by Cynthia Ozick, pieces by Abraham Kahan, and pieces about being transgender or cooking gefilte fish for the very first time, doing all sorts of things. And there's also a section on language and how we American Jews had Yiddish as our memory, collective memory, and that memory lives with us. And it is now up to us in 2020 to continue to embrace it or to give it up. Yiddish has always been on the edge, at the verge of the precipice. It's a language that very few languages has been systematically destroyed. And it's amazing that all these years after the Second World War, Yiddish refuses to die. It is very, very much alive in the Orthodox community, in certain academic circles, in people that are now going back to the farms and in agricultural activities. I think Yiddish is so much of who we are, and this book wants to pay tribute to that.
You know, I am hearing what you're saying, and it makes me wonder. So we're having a resurgence. We know that between, say, 1895 and 1915, we had a wave of immigrants who brought Yiddish to this country from Eastern Europe. And then to some of us on this call, it would have been our parents and grandparents speaking, or even ourselves. And now we see this sort of fading away. Maybe I'm wrong about that. And then a resurgence. How much of the resurgence has to do with people's increased knowledge, in general, the internet, the ability to share information? How much does it have to do with the Yiddish Book Center? Because as an institution, it is a remarkable place. And I had not realized until I started to think about your book and the Book Center. And you may know, and Terri told me this, I wasn't part of it, but 10 to 12 years ago, there was a tour, a bus ride that went from Temple Emmanuel out there. And we're hoping maybe as a follow-up to this, we might do that again when travel is possible. But, it's really, where is Yiddish now relative to the immigrants who brought it and now the increased new interest?
Let me put this, Stan, in some perspective. Though we often think that Yiddish is a relatively recent and modern phenomenon, by recent I say 150 years, 200 years, Yiddish is an ancestral language. It has about 1,000 years of age. There's a big debate on when and where it started, but when Chaucer was writing the Canterbury Tales, there was already Yiddish. When Shakespeare was putting together The Merchant of Venice, Yiddish was already spoken. Yiddish was around in the French Revolution and in the American War of Independence. And Yiddish has been around in many ways through the transformation of European Jews and the immigration that happened at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, as a result of the xenophobia and pogroms, the rise of anti-Semitism, and extreme poverty in which many of the Jews in the Pale of Settlement lived. Think of it this way, Stan. We Jews are word machines. We have produced more languages than any other people in the world. We have produced Judo-Italian and Judo-Persian and Judo-Arabic and Judo-Spanish called Ladino and Judo-German called Yiddish. And of course we have Hebrew, and that is not to say that we can't embrace languages that are not created by Jews. We're now communicating in English, and that simply by the fact that we are using it is also a Jewish language. Some sociolinguists and historians of language suggest that Jews probably have created altogether about 100 different languages, if not that many. Certainly half of that would be an astonishing achievement. Of all those languages, including Ladino, maybe with the only exception of Hebrew, Yiddish has become a reality unto itself. Yiddish from the 13th century, when it really emerged as a way of communication of the poor folks that lived in the Pale of Settlement, Poland, in the Ukraine and Belarus, in Russia, to the very present, has absorbed many other cultures into ours. Unlike all the other languages that I mentioned, Jewish languages, again, with the exception of Hebrew, we have translated into Yiddish a very vast number of books. You can have Dickens in Yiddish. You have Spinoza in Yiddish. You have the New Testament, the Christian Bible in Yiddish. You most recently have Harry Potter in Yiddish. You have Where the Wild Things Are and the Curious George. Yiddish has been voracious, not only in producing great works of art, but in bringing other works of art into us. Because the Yiddish-speaking Jews have been very curious and I would say restless in their engagement with the rest of the world. And that has been, to a large extent, the reason why it is in Yiddish that the most important novels by Jews were created before we did them in French or in German or in English. Sholem Aleichem with Tevye and Abramovich and Peretz and the two Zingers, the Isaac Bashevis Zinger and his brother, Israel Yeshua Zinger, and their sister, Esther Kreitman. So many Yiddish writers have produced work that I would put it in terms of how Isaac Bashevis Zinger saw it. They didn't want to write in Yiddish only for Jews. They wanted to write in Yiddish so that other people in the world would also be able to know what the Jews are. And so Yiddish was translated into many other languages. Bashevis Zinger, the only so far Nobel Prize winner, is mostly known through the languages into which Japanese, into which he has been translated. So why the revival of Yiddish now? I think it has a lot to do with a desire by American Jews to re-ethnicize ourselves, to say that we entered the center of American culture and maybe we sacrificed a great deal in that journey of arrival. And now it is up to our children and grandchildren to recover, to rediscover something that might have been lost along the way. I often like to say how different it was my Yiddish education as a Mexican Jew, as a Mexicaner Bocher, with that of my cousins in Long Island or in Chicago. Whereas for me, Yiddish was the language of instruction. I went to the Yiddish Schule in Mexico. We learned not only Bashevis and Peretz and the Zingers in the original, we learned Mexican history in Yiddish. Whereas my cousins in Long Island, who I adore, often tell me that for them, Yiddish was the language not to understand. Their parents and grandparents would use it when they wanted to talk financial issues or domestic issues or sexual issues, so that the kinder and the great-grandchildren would not understand. And I find it ironic and sad that a language was used to the opposite of what a language was meant to be. That is, instead of communicating, it was kind of stopping communication. But I think there is a driving young people right now, American Jews and non-Americans, to reacquire the language. I say with enormous pride that a couple of my students were on the cast of a Tevye in Yiddish on Broadway, and that I had a bunch of friends who were also on the cast who were non-Jews acting in Yiddish. They had learned the language and were performing in this place. So it's a delicious irony that sometimes it will be left to non-Jews to help us realize the value of something that we have had for a long time and might have forgotten.
That's beautiful, and I learn from these things, and it's increased my interest. Now, you said it's a delicious thing, so I'd like to shift the subject a little bit to food, because what seemed to occur is that as the Jews moved into the Lower East Side, they were seeking ways to assimilate into the culture. And the question became, how could they do that and attend, to restaurants in public and so forth. And one of the things that I took from the book that I've shared with others that I thought was incredibly fascinating is to say, and I want everybody to hear this, that Chinese food is made with no dairy. Now, you did point out in the book that eventually they worked in some shredded pork and, other things, maybe, some meat, rather dairy products in a, I can't think of little fried kreplach looking things.
That's right.
But that is just a great example of that. And then you speak about the delicatessen and its social fabric and then how it evolved. And now it's just a shame because all of that seems to have drifted away. And so I thought maybe a little bit of conversation in that regard. And by the way, you're very easy to, I don't have to worry about filling too much space here. So
maybe I should be quiet. I, of course, what is Yiddish if not sitting together and schmoozing and talking about the food that we have in front of us? Yiddish culture is Yiddish food. And by Yiddish food, I mean the dishes that Yiddish-speaking Jews have always surrounded themselves with. I am personally fascinated and also perplexed, Stan, by the concept of Jewish food. What is it that makes Jewish food Jewish? Much of what we consider Yiddish food is really Eastern European food that the Yiddish speakers adapted to their own menus and diets. My wife and I, just a year ago, I can't believe the world has changed so much, went to Latvia and Lithuania, and we were having the borscht, and we were having the herring, and we were having some kreplach, but none of it was described as Jewish food. It was just the staple of those national cuisines. And when tomorrow I talk with a Mexican Jewish chef, and the topic is going to be, it's an event organized by the Jewish Book Council, what makes Mexican Jewish food Jewish? I have no trouble recognizing it as Mexican, but it is also the fact that Mexican Jews have engaged in this fusion of putting salsa and mango and kiwi to a gefilte fish or to the kreplach that we're going to eat. In my own house in Hanukkah, we make a very big party here in Amherst, and we bring, 100 people to eat latkes with mole. They have become really a kind of a staple of the holidays for many people, and it's the Yiddish tradition with the Mexican tradition that mole, as you know, is a chocolate-based, delicious sauce that you can put on beef or you can put on chicken. I love the fact that Yiddish cooks have adapted themselves to the many different environments. And today we think of a bagel as Jewish food, as Yiddish food, but the bagel, some say, began in the German immigrant community, and the Jews adopted it. The pickles, the ones that make the cover of the book, is also coming from other parts of the world. But who cares? We Jews absorb and recycle, and then maybe give it a little better taste than it had in the different national landscapes. Just to complete this, Stan, there's a section in the book that you were referring to about the fusion of Yiddish food, and I love a particular section where Procter, in the 1940s, it started coming out with recipes for the new Jewish housewife, how to cook at home. I couldn't stop myself from including that in the book.
Yeah.
It's so, mouth-watering.
So Ilan, another great segue, because one of the things that we know from our culture is that the place for women was at home in the immigrant community, and they were keeping the home, raising family, keeping Shabbat, the holidays. And I noticed in the book there was a fair amount of referencing to women's writing, but it was really a male-dominated affair. And I just thought it would be interesting to ask you to speak about how women were involved in the evolution of literature and music and theater and so forth, because it's just important, I think, that the voice is there and it should be recognized, because you pointed out in the book quite nicely, and I would like to have you share that with the other people on the call.
I appreciate very much this question. Stan, let's begin by thinking that Yiddish started as a women's language. It was for the Freuen who were not able to access the Hebrew that was used by the Talmudists and by the rabbis. It was the language of children, of women, and of the illiterate, the jargon, second rate, considered unworthy, the one that was spoken at home, the Mameloshen, the language of the mother, or the mother tongue as well. And I love this because it was really the women who started the language, this fusion of German and Hebrew, and then pushed it forward for centuries. Some of the best writings that we have in the Renaissance are memoirs by women whose husbands, for instance, Glickel, dies, and she has to run the family in Germany. It's in a beautifully eloquent Yiddish, almost in a pure Yiddish, but the concept of purity in Yiddish is an anachronism, because Yiddish began as that kind of contaminated encounter, marriage between Hebrew and German. And of course, we see it today that in spite of the fact that men got all the attention at the end of the 19th century, second half, Sholem Aleichem and Peretz and Abramovich, the one that I was mentioning to you, and even in the early years of immigration to the United States, women were in the background producing an extraordinary literature. And now that we can kind of open up the curtains and see what they were making, we see the quality and we grant them voice and we celebrate the power that they had. And what this anthology wants to do is kind of set the record straight to allow the Celia Popkins and the Katya Molodovskys that never got the spotlight like the Bashevis singers or the Chaim Grades to show the first-rate poetry and short stories that they produced, and that now we can see beyond the eclipse with clarity as we move in the direction of more gender equality. And there's one last thing that I want to say, Stan, before we move to whatever next topic you have in hand for me. That is that there is an ongoing debate in intellectual circles that Yiddish is a feminine language vis-a-vis Hebrew that is a masculine language. That Hebrew became the language of the state of Israel, and as a result, because of the army, because of the masculinity that the Chalutzniks had at the very beginning, there is this sense that Hebrew is male, and Yiddish a language without an address, without a flag, without a government, a transient language that has traveled from one diaspora to another, is resilient, but it is more delicate. I don't know if this way of opposing things is a valid one. It certainly is a controversial one, but it is something that exists within certain intellectual circles, that Yiddish in and of itself is more receptive, more vulnerable, and more feminine. I adore Yiddish. I think that if there is a femininity there, it's the greatest form of expression. And so it goes together with the question that you were asking about the role of women, and here the larger vision of what a language can or cannot do. It's very interesting because when Ben-Gurion was putting together his very first cabinet to create the state, in the creation of the State of Israel, all of them were Yiddish speakers. Why is it that Israel did not end up being a state with the official language being Yiddish? Because Yiddish was seen as the language of the diaspora, the language that had received the aggressions but had not acted back. Hebrew was the one that was resisting, and the fate shows us what that means today in the revival of Yiddish.
Thank you. I was curious about the Sephardi population in Mexico, Latin America. How is it that Yiddish, which is thought of as Eastern European, Poland, that came to America, ended up being so predominant that Elias said earlier that his father, when he visited, only spoke Yiddish, and that you were schooled in Yiddish. And I was just wanting you to share that because the migration of the language seems different than the source of the people.
Interesting. Let me tell you that in Latin America, Latin America was founded with 1492 and the expulsion of the Jews from the Iberian Peninsula. Many crypto-Jews, many marranos, those that were hiding their identity, escaped to the new colonies, and some of them kept their Jewish faith intact, but in secret. Some of them spoke Ladino, but the majority of them spoke Spanish. There was a parallel immigration at the end of the 19th century between Yiddish-speaking Jews that were coming to America, but they were also going to Argentina particularly. Argentina was a great magnet of the Jewish immigration between 1880 and 1930. There was even at one point the possibility for the Zionists in their various congresses. Herzl, in his book, The Jewish State, talks about maybe creating the new land for the Jews in the Pampas, not in Jerusalem. So a lot of Jews, Yiddish speakers, were going in that direction. And simultaneous with that, there was an immigration of Sephardic Jews that had been raised in the Ottoman Empire, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, Greece, the former Yugoslavia. Some of them spoke Ladino, others spoke French. They arrived to Latin America. When I grew up in Mexico, there were two Jewish communities, the Yiddish-speaking and the French or Ladino-speaking, the Sephardic and the Ashkenazi communities. I think that the difference between the United States and Latin America when it comes to Yiddish, Stan, is that in Latin America, the Yiddish schools were the only alternative for secular Jews to continue the Jewish cultural vision that they had for their children. It wasn't religious. It was really Bundist, so to speak, that our kids, my parents thought that it was the only way for me to become a cultured Jew, not a religious Jew, to send me to the Yiddish school. In the United States, the majority of immigrants very quickly started sending their kids to public schools, where English was the main dominant language. And so, as it's always the pattern of immigrant groups, Yiddish, like Italian and German and Russian with other immigrant groups, started to secede, to reseed, and the children of immigrants only heard Yiddish at home, but their parents spoke to it, but learned in English. And the grandchildren of immigrants had a nostalgia for Yiddish because it was the language that their grandparents had spoken, but they had really not used for themselves. And that nostalgia, I think, is what is pushing people right now to regain. But I should say that nostalgia alone, my friends, does not make a language come back. It makes effort, it takes effort, it takes conviction, and the absolute knowledge that with the death of a language comes the death of a civilization. And that if we allow Yiddish to perish, to be overtaken by oblivion, we will allow for the entire civilization to go the same way. And it is up to us.
Thank you, Ilan. We're just about at the time where we should take some questions, and I see they're coming in. But before we do, and we'll turn that over to Terri and Sam, what I'd like to ask you is, what are you working on now?
I am working now on a couple of projects. One is for like 4 years, I've been working on a biography of Bashevis Singer. It's a new take on him as an American writer and a Yiddish writer. I hope to finish it very soon. And the other thing that I'm working on, although there are a number of other projects on the side, is that when I first came to this country, Stan, I had no money, and I needed to work as a translator from Spanish. And I met this very bizarre man, very, very wealthy, who would send a limo to pick me up in this closet of a dorm that I lived in, and would pay me very handsomely to write letters to his wife. And I want to turn that into a novel.
Interesting. Good, good, good. Well, thank you. Let's shift over to questions, because I see they're coming in. And Terri and Samantha,
Yeah,
are you ready to go?
I'm just gonna share a few questions, and then
All right, I'm going to mute myself. And
okay, and you can pick and choose which ones you want to answer. Miriam asked, besides Hasidism, the Hasids, which group speaks Yiddish today in the U.S. and other countries? And then somebody else asked, Alice asked, is Yiddish written Yiddish also going through a revival, or just spoken Yiddish? And where is Yiddish being taught today? It's not in a conservative synagogue, Hebrew schools, or universities. Where's it coming from? So let's start with those two.
Great. The first question is, who speaks Yiddish today? There is a rough estimate, my friend, that approximately 200,000 people use Yiddish today in the world, in different parts of the world. That includes the United States and Israel, but also Canada, South Africa, Argentina, in Canada, other parts of the world. A large percentage of those 200,000 are Orthodox Jews. They are not only Hasidim. They can be Lubavitchers, they can be different types of Hasidim, they can be a kind of distant Orthodox Jews. In the very Orthodox community, there is a sense that Yiddish has a practical side to it, but not necessarily a literary or a literate side. I have spoken with many Hasidim in Yiddish who see the language mostly as a quick way of communicating, but it's unworthy of Hebrew, say, or even English. They would not read Shalom Aleichem, or the majority of them would not read Shalom Aleichem or Peretz or Bashevis Singer. They don't see themselves connected with the literary tradition that Yiddish created and that is so exalted in of incredible power. Yiddish is taught in the Hasidic community for that reason. The children and grandchildren speak that improvised Yiddish. Yiddish, for many centuries, had varieties. There was the Lithuanian Yiddish, Litvak, that it was different from the Galicianer Yiddish from Galicia. And then when it came to the United States, it went through its own transformation, and there was something even called Yinglish, which was the mix of Yiddish and English. Two Yiddish speakers would often make fun of how they were pronouncing, the accents that they had, the use of certain lexicon, the way that, say, a Canadian and a person from India and from New Zealand in an American or in a British person would notice their accents or the spellings of certain words. But Yiddish is also taught in colleges today. Many colleges are offering Yiddish. There are Yiddish clubs that are emerging all over the place in different parts of the world. And in the United States, there is also a return to the land movement that is agricultural among young people that are connected with the ecology, with the environment. And a fraction of them see Yiddish as their ticket to return to a particular view of how Jews were connected to the land about 100, 150 years ago. And so there are farms where Yiddish is spoken day in and day out. There are also klezmer festivals, and there are cultural organizations like YIVO and the Yiddish Book Center who make it their responsibility to have these courses.
Ruth Gold just wrote that the Yiddish Book Center just published a new textbook, which is being used in universities.
An astonishing, years in the making textbook that incorporates new pedagogical approaches, that is very up to date in vocabulary, that is really a statement of how Yiddish, I mean, if you have a textbook that people are going to be used, that means that people are interested in this. And
Right.
it has been a big investment, and I am very excited about it.
Is written Yiddish being taught?
Written Yiddish is being taught, of course, in many of those courses, and as is oral Yiddish. There is no divorce between the two. And typewriters and keyboards are being made accessible so that you can use Yiddish in different forms. I should also say that we have tweets in Yiddish, Instagram in Yiddish, Facebook groups in Yiddish. The social media, as powerful and also dangerous as it can be, has really helped Yiddish push for new ways of spreading.
Yeah, Suzanne Klingenstein wrote that COVID-19 was a boost to the Yiddish learning, that there's all these classes that are on Zoom these days.
I just think that COVID-19 has been a boost to Jewish learning in general, not only Yiddish. The amount of Jewish groups that have emerged, of that curiosity that never ends. So let us get all together. And we talk about social distancing, Terri, but I have been more close to people in this 6 or 7 months by this kind of screen that maybe I'm forgetting what the world was before.
Finally, can you share like a favorite vignette of yours or two that came from the book?
One of the famous vignettes is, it's not quite a vignette, but it's a line that I adore, and I have the book here with me, and I want to share it with everybody. It's a line by Isaac Bashevis Singer, and it's the epigraph that we use in the introduction. It says like this: we have to believe in free will, we have no choice. And I think that says so much about Yiddish and about Jews, that we see ourselves as being very free, but also committed to a determined way of how the future looks. And let me add to this, Terri, that when Bashevis Singer won the Nobel Prize in 1978, he said mistakenly that Yiddish, because it has no army, it really has no vocabulary for weapons, which is not true. It had many words to describe rifles and guns and tanks, etc. But what he also said is that Yiddish has been always in a state of dying, but it doesn't get there. And I think that despair or that anxiety that is always with Yiddish, will it disappear? Will there be another chapter? Is what keeps many of us on the edge and pushing forward. For me, Yiddish, aside from a language, is the memory of my family, the memory of a culture that defines me from head to toe.
Yeah. Okay, that's fantastic. Stan, you want to thank Ilan and wrap up for us?
So
Thank you.
really great. I so much enjoyed having the opportunity to meet you in person. I've watched some of your video interviews, and it's been really lovely. For everybody, this is the book. It's available on Amazon. You can find it easily. I think it's worth reading. And you've made me have a little bit more interest in your work, and especially the upcoming book on Isaac Bashevis Singer. So let me say to everybody, thank you. I think it was great that we could all be here. And 2 weeks from now, we'll have our next session. You need to register separately. You'll get a confirmation. Hopefully you can make it. We'll send another email to announce. And then 4 weeks from now, Elias will be talking about Yiddish music. And if you've ever or never been to any of his classes, you really should not miss this. So thank you, Ilan, Terri, Elias, Sam, everybody. And thank you for taking time from the political world to be part of the Yiddish world.
Yeah, and thank you to Stan for creating this series for us. So we look forward to the next two. Good night, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night, Ilan.
Thank you so much.
Gracias por estar con nosotros.
Gracias, Elias. Un gran placer.
Gracias. Un abrazo grande.
Okay, and now in Yiddish.
A großen Dank. A großen Dank.
Yeah, I knew
Schönen
that
Dank.
A schönen Dank. Okay, bye-bye.
Lila Tov, thank you.
Lila Tov. I can do that.
Thanks, Sam.